It's rusting in green. Afternoon light. Typewriters dreaming. All through the night. A smiling sun hangs on a cardboard sky. Where the future got lost but never learned to die. Unseen visions burning bright. Bradbury's goes on SL tonight. Open the page, let the wonder ignite. Welcome to SL2.
Tonight, we're a long way from the crypt. Tonight, we're in Florida. Hot nights, katydids, and a lake so beautiful it hurts to look at. A new teacher just took the job at a secluded summer school. The water is perfect. Too perfect. Tananarive Due wrote this one in 2011. It's called The Lake. Lock your doors, close the windows, and whatever you do, don't follow the singing. The new English instructor at Gracetown Prep was chosen with the greatest care. Highly recommended by the board of directors at Blake Academy in Boston, where she had an exemplary career for 12 years. No history of irregular behavior presaged the summer's unthinkable events. Excerpt from an internal memo, Gracetown Preparatory School, Gracetown, Florida. Abby LaFleur was an outsider, a third-generation Bostonian, so no one warned her about summers in Gracetown. She noticed a few significant glances, a hitched eyebrow or two, when she first mentioned to locals that she planned to relocate in June to work a summer term before the start of the school year. But she assumed it was because they thought no one in her right mind would move to Florida, even northern Florida, in the wet heat of summer. In fairness, Abby LaFleur would have scoffed at their stories as hysteria, delusion. This is Gracetown's typical experience with newcomers and outsiders, so Gracetown had learned to keep the stories to itself. Abby thought she had found a dream job in Gracetown, a fresh start. Her glasses had fogged up with steam from the rain-drenched tarmac as soon as she stepped off the plane at Tallahassee Airport, her confirmation that she'd embarked on a true adventure, an exploration worthy of Ponce de Leon's storied landing at St. Augustine. Her parents and her best friend Mary Kay had warned her not to jump into a real estate purchase until she worked in Gracetown for at least a year. The whole thing's so hasty. What if the school's not a good fit? Who wants to be stuck with a house in the sticks in a depressed market? But Abby fell in love with a white lakeside colonial she found listed at $150 for sale by owner. She bought it after a hasty tour. Too hasty, it turned out, but at nearly 3,000 square feet, this was the biggest house she'd ever lived in, with more room than she had furniture for. A place with potential despite its myriad flaws. A place, she thought, very much like her. The built-in bookshelves in the Florida room sagged. She'd never known that a den could be called a Florida room, but so it was, and so she did. The floorboards creaked and trembled on the back porch, sodden from summer rainfall, and she would need to lay down new tiles in the kitchen right away, because the brooding mud-brown flooring put her in a bad mood from the time she first fixed her morning coffee. But there would be boys at the school, strong and tireless boys, who could help her and mend whatever needed fixing. In her experience, there were always willing boys. And then there was the lake. The house was her excuse to buy her piece of the lake and the thin strip of red-brown sand that was a beach in her mind, although it was nearly too narrow for the beach lounger she planted like a flag. The water looked murky where it met her little beach, the color of the soil, but in the distance she could see that its heart of rich green blue like the ocean. The surface bobbed with rings and bubbles from the hidden catfish and brim that occasionally leaped above the surface, damn near daring her to cast the line. If not for the hordes of mosquitoes that feasted on her legs and whined with urgent grievances, Abby could have stood with her bare feet in the warm lake water for hours, the house forgotten behind her. The water's gentle lapping was the meditation her parents and Mary Kay were always prescribing for her, a soothing song. And the isolation, a gift to be treasured. Her property was bracketed by the wind of the woods of thin pine, with no other homes within shouting distance. Any spies on her would need binoculars and a reason to spy, since the nearest homes were far across the lake. Harmless little dollhouses in the anonymous subdivision where some of her students no doubt lived. Her lake might as well be as wide as the Nile, protection from any envious whispers. As if to prove her newfound freedom, Abby suddenly climbed out of the tattered jeans she'd been wearing as she unpacked her boxes, whipped off her t-shirt, and draped her clothing neatly across the lounger's armrest. Imagine, she was naked in her own backyard. If her neighbors could see her, they'd be scandalized already, and she had yet commenced teaching at Gracetown Prep. Abby wasn't much of a swimmer. She preferred solid ground beneath her feet even when she was in the water, but with the flip-flops to protect her from unseen rocks, Abby felt brave enough to wade into the water, inviting its embrace above her knees, her thighs. She felt the water's gentle kiss between her legs, the massage across her belly, and finally liquid cloak upon her shoulders. The grade was gradual, with no sudden drop-offs to startle her, and for the first time in years, Abby felt truly safe and happy. That was all Gracetown was supposed to be for Abby LaFleur. New job, new house, new lake, new beginning. For the week before summer school began, Abby took to swimming behind her house daily at dusk, safe from the mosquitoes, sinking into her sanctuary. No one had told her, not the realtor, not the elderly widow she'd only met once when they signed the paperwork at the lawyer's office downtown, not Gracetown Prep's cheerful headmistress. Even a random first grader at the grocery store could have told her that one must never, ever go swimming at Gracetown's lakes during the summer. The man-made lakes were fine, but the natural lakes that had once been swampland were avoided by children in particular, and women of childbearing age, which Abby LaFleur still was at 36, I'll bet barely, and men who were prone to quick tempers or alcohol binges. Further, one must never, ever swim in Gracetown's lakes in summer without clothing, when crevices and weaknesses were most exposed. In retrospect, she was foolish, but in all fairness, how could she have known? Abby's ex-husband had accused her of irreparable timidity, criticizing her for refusing to go snorkeling or even swimming with dolphins, never mind the scuba diving he'd loved since he was 16. The world was populated by water people and land people, and Abby was firmly attached to terra firma, until Gracetown, and the lake. Soon after, she began her nightly wading, which gradually turned to dog paddling and then awkward strokes across the dark surface. She began to dream about the water. Her dreams were far removed from the nightly dipping, which actually was something timid, if she was honest. In sleep she glided effortlessly far beneath the murky surface, untroubled by the nuisance of lungs and breathing. The water was a muddy green-brown, nearly black, but spears of light from above gave her tints of vision to see floating plankton, algae, tadpoles, and squirming tiny creatures she could not name, and yet knew. Her underwater dreams were a wonderland of tangled mangrove roots coated with algae, and forests of gently waving lily pads and swamp grass. Once she saw an alligator's checkered pale belly above her until the reptile hurried away, its powerful tail lashing to give it speed. In her dream, she wasn't afraid of the alligator. She'd smelled instead, that the alligator was afraid of her. Abby's dreams never had been so vivid. She woke one morning drenched from head to toe, and her heart hammered her breathless until she realized that her mattress was damp with perspiration, not swamp water. At least, she thought it must be perspiration. Her fear felt silly, and she was blanketed by sadness as deep as she'd felt the first months after her divorce. Abby was so struck by her dreams that she called Mary Kay, who kept dream diaries and took such matters far too seriously. "You sure that water's safe?" Mary Kay said. "No chemicals being dumped out there?" The water's fine, Abby said, defensive. I'm not worried about the water. It's just the dreams. They're so... Abby rarely ran out of words, which Mary Kay knew full well. What's scaring you about the dreams? The dreams don't scare me. It's the opposite. I'm sad to wake up, as if I belong there, in the water, and my bedroom is the dream. Mary Kay had nothing to offer except a warning to have the local health department come out and check for chemicals in any water she was swimming in, and Abby felt the weight of her distance from her friend. There had been a time when she and Mary Kay understood each other better than anyone, when they could see past each other's silences straight to their thoughts, and now Mary Kay had no idea of the shape and textures of Abby's life. No one did. All liberation is loneliness, she thought sadly. Abby dressed sensibly, conservatively, for her first day at her new school. She had driven 2 miles to the school, a red brick converted bank building in the center of downtown Gracetown, before she noticed itching between her toes. LaFleur, the headmistress said, keeping pace with Abby as they walked towards her assigned classroom for the course she named Creativity and Literature. The woman's easy, southern-bred tang seemed to add a syllable to every word. Where is that name from? Abby wasn't fooled by the veiled attempt to guess at her ethnicity, since it didn't take an etymologist to guess at her name's French derivation. What Loretta Millhouse really wanted to know was whether Abby had ancestry in Haiti or Martinique to explain her sun-kissed complexion and curly brown hair Abby kept locked tight in a bun. Abby's itching feet had grown so unbearable that she wished she could pull off her pumps. The itching pull pushed irritation into her voice. My grandmother married a Frenchman in Paris after World War II, she explained. LaFleur was his family name. The rest was none of her business. Most of her life was none of anyone's business. Oh, I see, Millhouse said, voice filled with delight, but Abby saw her disappointment that her prying had yielded nothing. Well, as I said, we're so tickled to have you with us. Only one letter in your file wasn't completely glowing. Abby's heart went cold and she forgot her feet. She assumed that her detractors had remained silent or she never would have been offered the job. Millhouse patted her arm. But don't you worry. Swimming upstream is an asset here. The word swimming made Abby flinch, feeling exposed. We welcome independent thinking at Gracetown Prep. That's the main reason I wanted to hire you. Between you and me, how can anyone criticize a creative mind? She said that the last words conspiratorially, leaning close to Abby's ear as if a creative mind were a disease. Abby's mind raced. The criticism must have come from Johansson, the vice principal at Blake, who had labeled her argumentative, a bitch. Mary Kay had overheard him call her privately, but he wouldn't have put that in writing. What did Millhouse's disclosure mean? Was Millhouse someone who pretended to compliment you while subtly putting you down? Or was a shared secret hidden between the twinkle in her awkward green eyes? Don't go easy on this group, Millhouse said as they reached room 113. Every jock trying to make up a credit to stay on the roster is in your class. Let them work for it. Sure enough, when Abby walked into the room, she faced desks filled with athletic young men. Gracetown was a co-ed school, but only 5 of her 20 students were female. Abby smiled. Her house would be fixed up sooner than she expected. Abby liked to begin with Thomas Hardy, Jude the Obscure. That one always blew their young minds with its frankness and unconventionality. Their other instructors would cram conformity down their throats, and she would teach rebellion. No rows of desks would mar her classroom, she informed them. They would sit in a circle, she would not lecture, they would have conversations. They would discuss the readings, read pages from their journals, and share poems. Some days, she told them, she would surprise them by playing music, and they would write whatever came to mind. Half the class looked relieved, the other half petrified. During her orientation, Abby studied her students' faces and tried to guess which ones would be most useful over the summer. She dismissed the girls, as she usually did. Most were too wispy and pampered or far too large to be accustomed to physical labor. Okay. But the boys were a different matter. Of the 15 boys, only 3 were unsuitable at a glance. Bird-chested and reedy, or faces riddled with acne. She could barely stand to look at them. That left 12 to ponder. She listened carefully as they raised their hands and described their hopes and dreams, watching their eyes for the spark of maturity she needed. 5 or 6 couldn't hold her gaze, casting their eyes shyly at their desks. No good at all. down to 6 then. Several were basketball players, one a quarterback. Millhouse hadn't been kidding when she said that her class was a haven for desperate athletes. The quarterback, Derek, was dark-haired with crater-sized dimple in his chin. He sat at his desk with his body angled, leg crossed at the knee, as if the desk were already too small. He didn't say or pause between his sentences. His future was at the tip of his tongue. I'm sorry, she said, interrupting. How old did you say you are, Derek? He didn't blink. His dark eyes were at home on hers. 16, ma'am. 16 was a good age, a mature age. A female teacher could not be too careful about which student she invited to her home. Locker room exaggerations held grave consequences that could literally steal years from a young woman's life. Abby had seen it before, entire careers up in flames. But this Derek was full of possibilities. Abby suddenly found herself playing Millhouse's game, noting his olive complexion and dark features, trying to guess if his jet black hair whispered Native American or Latino heritage. Wow! Throughout the 90-minute class, her eyes came to Derek again and again. The young man wasn't flustered. He was used to being stared at. Abby had made up her mind before the final bell, but she didn't say a word to Derek. Not yet. She had plenty of time. The summer had just begun. As she was climbing out of the shower, Abby realized her feet had stopped their terrible itching. For 3 days, she slathered the spaces between her toes with creams from Walgreens. Nothing helped, some only stinging her in punishment. But the pain was gone. Naked, Abby raised her foot to her mattress, pulling her toes apart to examine them, and realized right away she'd been itching so badly. Thin webs of pale skin had grown between each of her toes. Her toes, in fact, had changed shape entirely, pulling away from each other to make room for webbing. And weren't her toes longer than she remembered? No wonder her shoes felt so tight. She wore a size 8, but her feet looked like they'd grown 2 sizes. She was startled to see her feet so altered, but not alarmed, as she might have been when she was still in Boston, tied to her old life. New job, new house, new feet. There was a logical symmetry to her new feet that superseded questions or worries. Abby almost picked up her phone to call Mary Kay, but she thought better of it. What else would Mary Kay say except that she should have her water tested? Instead, still naked, Abby went to her kitchen, her feet slapping against her ugly kitchen flooring with unusual traction. When she brushed her upper arm carelessly across her ribs, new pain made her hiss. The itching had migrated, she realized. She paused in the bright fluorescent lighting to peer down at her ribcage and found her skin bright red, besieged by some kind of rash. Great, she thought. Life is an endless series of challenges. She inhaled a deep breath and the air felt hot and thin. The skin across her ribs pulled more tautly, constricting. She longed for the lake. Abby slipped out of her rear kitchen door and scurried across her backyard towards the black shimmer of the water. She'd forgotten her flip-flops, but the soles of her feet were less tender, like leather slippers. She did not hesitate. She did not wade. She dove like an eel, swimming with an eel's ease. Am I truly awake, or is this a dream? Her eyes adjusted to the lack of light, bringing instant focus. She'd never seen the true murky depths of her lake, so much like the swamp of her dreams. Were they the one and the same? Her ribs itching turned to be a welcome massage, and she felt long slits yawn open across her skin beneath each rib. Warm water flooded her, nursing her. Her nose, throat, and mouth were a useless distant memory. Why hadn't it ever occurred to her to breathe the water before? An alligator's curiosity brought the beast close enough to study her, but it recognized its mistake and tried to thrash away. But too late. Too late. Nourished by the water, Abby's instincts gave her enough speed and strength to glide behind the beast, its shadow. One hand grasped the slick ridges of his tail, and the other hugged its wriggling girth the way she might a leopard. She didn't remember biting or clawing the alligator, but she must have done one or the other because the water flowed red with blood. The blood startled Abby awake in her bed, her sheets heavy with dampness. Her lungs heaved and gasped, shocked by the reality of breathing, and at first she seemed to take in no air. She examined her fingers, nails, and naked skin for blood, but found none. The absence of blood helped her breathe more easily, her lungs freed from their confusion. Another dream, of course. How could she mistake it for anything else? She was annoyed to realize that her ribs still bore their painful rash and long lines like raw, infected incisions. But her feet, thank goodness, were unchanged. She still had the delightful webbing and impressive new size, longer than in her dream. Abby knew she would have to dress in a hurry. Before school, she would swing by Payless and pick up a few new pairs of shoes. Derek lingered after class. He'd written a poem based on a news story that had made a deep impression on him. A boy in Naples had died on a football practice field before he could be tested by life. Derek had written in his eloquent final line, one of the girls, Riley Bowen, had wiped a tear from her eye. Riley Bowen always gazed at Derek like the answer to her life's prayers, but he never looked at her. And now here was Derek standing over Abby's desk on his way to 6 feet tall, his face bowed with shyness for the first time all week. I lied before, he said, when she waited for him to, so to speak, about my age. Abby already knew. She checked his records and found out for herself, but she decided to torture him. Then how old are you? 15. His face soured. Till March. Why would you lie about that? He shrugged in an adolescent gesture that annoyed Abby no end. Of course, you know, I heard your poem. I've seen your thoughtfulness. You wouldn't lie on the first day of school without a reason. He found his confidence again, raised his eyes. Fine, I skipped second grade, so I'm a year younger than everyone in my class. Always say I'm 16. It wasn't special for you. The fight in Derek intrigued her. He wouldn't be the type of man who would be pushed around. But you're here now, bearing your soul. Who's that for? His face softened to half a grin. Like you said, when we're in this room, we tell the truth, so here I am, telling the truth. There he was. She decided to tell him the truth, too. I bought a big house out by the lake, she said, against my better judgment, maybe. That old one on McCormack Road? You know it? He shrugged. That loathsome gesture again. Everyone knows the McCormacks. She taught Sunday school at Christ the Redeemer. Guess she moved out, huh? Two of her sisters in Quincy? The town shared a name with a city south of Boston, the only reason she remembered it. Her mind was filled with distraction and masked strange flurries of her heart. Was she so cowed that she would leave her house in a mess? Yeah, Quincy's about an hour and a half down to 10, Derek was saying in a flat voice that bored even him. They were talking about nothing, waiting. They both knew it. Abby clapped her hands once, snapping their conversation from its trance. Well, an old house brings lots of problems. The porch needs fixing, new kitchen tiles. I don't have the budget to hire a real handyman, so I'm looking for people with skills. Mm-hmm. Derek's cheeks brightened pink. My dad and I built a cabin last summer. I'm pretty good with wood, do planks and stuff for the porch. Really? She chided herself for the girlish rise in her pitch, as if he'd announced he'd scaled Mount Everest during his 2 weeks off from school. I could help you out if you buy the supplies. I can't pay much. Come take a look after school, see if you think you can help. She made a show of glancing toward the open doorway, watching the stream of students passing by. But you know, Derek, it's easy for people to get the wrong idea if you say you're going to a teacher's house. His face was bright red now. Oh, I wouldn't say nothing. I mean, anything. Besides, we go fishing with Coach Reed all the time. It's no big deal around here. Not like in Bison, maybe. The longer he spoke, the more he regained his poise. His last sentence had come with an implied wink of his eye. No, you're right about that, she said, and smiled, remembering her new feet. Nothing here is like it was in Boston. And that was how Derek Verhoeven came to spend several days a week after class helping Abby fix her ailing house, whenever he could spare time after football practice in the last daylight. Abby made it clear that he couldn't expect any special treatment class, so he would need to work hard on his atrocious spelling. But Derek was thorough and uncomplaining. No task seemed too big or small, and he was happy to scrub, sand, and tile in exchange for a few dollars. Conversation about the assigned reading and fishing rights to the lake, since he said the catfish favored the north side where it was quiet. As he'd promised, he told no one at Gracetown Prep, but one day he asked if his cousin Jack could help from time to time, and after he'd brought the stocky, freckled youth by to introduce him, she agreed. Jack was only 14, but he was strong and didn't argue. He also attended the public school, which made him far less a risk, although the boys joked together. Jack's presence never slowed Derek's progress much, so Derek and Jack became fixtures in her home well into July. Abby looked forward to fixing them lemonade and white chocolate macadamia nut cookies from ready-made dough. And with each passing day, she knew she'd be right to leave Boston behind. Still, Abby never told Mary Kay about her visits with the boys and the work she asked them to do. Her friend wouldn't judge her, but Abby wanted to hold her new life close, a secret she would share only when she was ready, when she could say, "You'll never guess the clever way I got my improvements done," an experience long behind her. Mary Kay would be envious, wishing she'd thought of it first, rather than spend a fortune on a gardener and a pool boy. But there were other reasons Abby began erecting a wall between herself and the people who knew her best. Derek and Jack, bright as they were, weren't prone to notice the small changes, or even the large ones that would have leaped out to her mother and Mary Kay, and even her distracted father. Her mother would have spotted the new size of her feet right away, of course, and the odder new pallor of her face, fish belly pale, and the growing strength in her arms and legs that made it so easy to hand the boys boxes, heavy tools, or stacks of wooden planks. Mary Kay would have asked about the flaky skin on the back of her neck and her sudden appetite for all things rare or raw. Abby had given up most red meat 2 years ago in an effort to remake herself after the divorce tore her self-esteem to pieces, but that summer she stocked up on thin-cut steaks, salmon, and fish she could practically eat straight from the package. Her hunger was also voracious, her mouth watering from the moment she woke, her growling stomach keeping her awake at night. She was hungriest when Derek and Jack were there, but she hid that from herself. Her dusk swims had grown to evening swims, and some nights she lost track of time so completely that the sky was blooming pink by the time she waded from the healing waters to begin another day of waiting to swim. She resisted inviting the boys to swim with her. Last Friday in July, with only a week left in the summer term, Abby lost her patience. She was especially hungry that day, dissatisfied with the kitchen stockpile. Gracetown was suffering a record heat wave with temperatures hovering near 110 degrees, so she was sweaty and irritable by the time the boys arrived at 5:30, and itching terribly. Unlike her feet, the gills hiding beneath the ridges of her ribs never stopped bothering her until she was in her lake. She was so miserable, she almost asked the boys to forget about painting the refurbished back porch and come back another day. If she'd only done that, she would have avoided the scandal. Abby strode behind the porch to watch the strokes of the boys' rollers and paintbrushes as they transformed her porch from an eyesore to a snapshot of the quaint old South. Because of the heat, both boys had taken their shirts off, their shoulders ruddy as the muscles in their sun-broiled backs flexed in the magic hour's furious gasping light. They put Norman Rockwell to shame. Derek with his disciplined football player's physique, and Jack with his awkward baby fat sprayed with endless freckles. "Why do you come here?" she asked them. They both stopped working, startled by her voice. "Huh?" Jack said. His scowl was deep, comical. "You're paying us, right?" $10 a day each was hardly pay. Derek generally shared half his $20 with his cousin for a couple hours' work, although Jack talked more than he worked, running his mouth about some summer superhero blockbusters and dancers and music videos. Abby regretted that she encouraged Derek to invite his cousin along, and that day she'd wished she had a reason to send Jack home. Her mind raced to come up with an excuse, but she couldn't think of one. A sudden surge of frustration pricked her eyes with tears. "I'm not paying much," she said. "Got that right," Derek said. He had his voice deepened in only a few weeks. Was Derek undergoing changes too? "I'm here for the catfish. Can we quit in 20 minutes? I got my rod in the truck and some chicken livers I've been saving." "Quit now if you want," she said. She pretended to study their work, but she couldn't focus her eyes on the whirls of painted wood. "Go on and fish, but I'm going swimming. Good way to wash off a hot day." She turned and walked away, following the familiar trail her feet had beaten across the backyard's scraggly patch of grass to a strip of sand. She planned to lay sod with the boys closer to fall, but that might not happen now. Abby pulled off her t-shirt, draping it nonchalantly across her beach lounge, taking her time. She didn't turn, but she could feel the boys' eyes on her bare back. She didn't wear a bra most days, her breasts were modest, so what was the point? One more thing Johansson had tried to hold against her. Her feet curled into the sand, searching for dampness. "It's all right if you don't have trunks," she said. "My backyard is private, and there's no harm in friends taking a swim." She thought she heard them breathing, or maybe harsh breaths were hers as her lungs prepared to give up their reign. The sun was unbearable on Abby's bare skin. Her sides burned like fire as the flaps beneath her ribs opened, swollen rose petals. The boys didn't answer, probably hadn't moved. She hadn't expected them to, not at first. One after the other, she pulled her long legs out of her jeans, standing at a discreet angle to hide most of her nakedness, like the Venus de Medici. She didn't want them to see her gills or the rougher patches on her scaly skin. She didn't want to answer questions. She and the boys spent too much time talking all summer. She wondered why she'd never invited them swimming before. She dove, knowing just where the lake was deep enough not to scrape her at the rocky floor. The water parted as startled catfish dashed out of her way. Fresh fish was best, That was another thing Abby had learned that summer. When her head popped back up above the surface, the boys were looking at each other, weighing the matter. Derek left the porch first, tugging on his tattered denim shorts, hopping on one leg in his hurry. Jack followed, but left his clothes on, arms folded across his chest. Derek splashed into the water, one white hand concealing his privates until he was submerged. He did not swim near her, leaving a good 10 yards between them. After a tentative silence, he whooped so loudly that his voice might have carried across the lake. Woo! Derek's face and eyes were bright, as if he'd never glimpsed the world in color before. Awesome! Abby's stomach growled. She might have to go after those catfish. She couldn't remember being so hungry. She felt faint. Jack only made it as far as the shoreline, still wearing his Bermuda shorts. Not supposed to swim in the lake in summer, he said sullenly, his voice barely loud enough to hear. He slapped at his neck. He stood in a cloud of mosquitoes. Derek spat, treading water. That's little kids, dumbass. Nobody's supposed to, Jack said. How old are you, 6? You don't want to swim? Fine. Don't stand staring, it's rude. Abby felt invisible during their exchange. She almost told Jack he should follow his best judgment without pressure, but she dove into the silent brown water instead. Young adults had to make decisions for themselves, especially boys, or how would they learn to be men? That was what she and Mary Kay had always believed. Anyone who thought differently was just being politically correct. In ancient times or in other cultures, a boy Jack's age would already have a wife, a child of his own. Just look at Mary Kay. Everyone had said her marriage would never work, that he'd been too young when they met. She'd been vilified and punished, and they still survived. The memory of her friend's trial broke Abby's heart. As the water massaged her gills, Abby released her thoughts and concerns about the frivolous world behind the water. She needed to feed, that was all. She planned to leave the boys to their bickering and swim farther out where the fish were hiding, but something large and pale caught her eye above her. Jack, she realized dimly. Jack had changed his mind, swimming near the surface, his ample belly full like a full moon, jiggling with his breaststroke. That was the first moment Abby felt a surge of fear, because she finally understood what she'd been up to, what her new body had been preparing her for. Her feet betrayed her, their webs giving her speed as she propelled toward her giant meal. Water slid across her scales. The beautiful fireball of light above the swimmer gave her pause, a reminder of a different time, another way. The tears that had stung her in the backyard tried to burn her eyes blind, because she saw how it would happen, exactly like a dream. She would claw the boy's belly open, and his scream would sound muffled and far away to her ears. Derek would come to investigate, to try to rescue him from what he would be sure was a gator, but she would overpower Derek next. Her new body would even if she could not. As Abby swam directly beneath the swimmer, bathed in magical light fighting to shield him, she tried to resist the overpowering scent of a meal, and remembered that he was a boy, someone's dear son. As Derek, was that the other one's name, had put it so memorably some time ago, perhaps while he was painting the porch, perhaps in one of her dreams, neither of them had yet been tested by life. But it was summertime, in Gracetown, in the lake. Now, she adds, I wrote this story for Christopher Golden after he invited me to submit to the anthology Monsters Corner, Stories Through Inhuman Eyes. The theme, Stories from a Monstrous Point of View. Some of my favorite stories have been written to themes, from places I would not have explored otherwise. The first monster that came to mind, a sexual predator. If only real monsters grew webbed feet and gills. Some waters don't give back what they take. Some songs only sound sweet until you're too far out to swim home. Good night, darlings. Stay on the porch.
The night was tattooed skin, and every story bled.
sun-bleached bone. Heard the children call us home while nursery walls burned alone.
Flew the silver rocket fire to a Venus drowned in endless rain. Watch the sun come out 1 hour, then never shine again.
0 hour came at 7. The invasion no one heard. Marionettes it took the parents while the kids never said a word. On Mars the highways rolled like rivers under crimson dust. The last Earth rocket left us ghost in a world that turned to rust.
These are the illustrated man's tales, ink that moves when the moonlight fails. From kaleidoscope eyes to the long cold years, every tattoo is a memory, every memory a tear.
We saw the city wait 1,000,000 years for men who never came. Felt the concrete, remember every footstep, every name.
Met the man who launched his child like Icarus to the sun. Watched the wax wings melt at noon and the father come undone. No particular night or morning, just the void between the stars. The fox in the forest ran from tomorrow back to yesterday's scars.
The other foot turned the tables when Mars got its revenge. Black faces, white rage, history bent but never cleansed. The visitor breathed blue life, then sold it for a ship. Exiles wept for banned books while Earth burned censorship.
And in the end, the illustrated man looked down at his own chest.
Saw the prologue become epilogue. The final tattoo was dead.
These were the illustrated man's tales, living ink that screams and never pales. From the belt to Venus, Mars, to the million-year town, every story we live is still moving now. Up close, the pictures are still moving.